By 2006 or 7, most publishers had already moved on from the PS2. The PS3 was launching, 360 was already out, and developers with any kind of budget were pointing their tools at the next generation. Which meant the PS2 got left to smaller studios, niche publishers, and teams who genuinely believed the hardware still had something left in it. What came out of that window was one of the strangest and most underrated RPG libraries the console produced. Games that nobody marketed, that shipped in small print runs, and that quietly became cult classics for the people who found them. These 10 are the best of that late era. Raido Kazuha vs. King Abaddon is the second action RPG in Atlus's Devil Summoner subseries. And it's the better refined version of a combat system the first game introduced, but didn't fully realize. Set in Taisho-era Japan, the early 20th century, a period of cultural collision between Western modernity and older Japanese traditions. It follows Raido, a government-employed devil summoner, investigating a series of disappearances connected to something much larger than a missing persons case. The setting gives the game an aesthetic unlike anything else in the SMT library. Suited investigators, rickshaws, early telephone technology, and a capital city in the process of becoming something it doesn't entirely recognize. Demon negotiation in real-time action combat requires reading each demon's personality and responding correctly to recruit rather than destroy. The negotiation system is more involved than the mainline SMT mechanic because the real-time context puts pressure on decisions that turn-based games give you time to consider. The loyalty system, which determines how aggressively your summoned demons fight based on how frequently you use them and how often you heed their in-battle suggestions, creates a relationship management layer across the whole campaign. The 2-demon active party limit and the ability to switch summon partners during combat give each encounter a tactical texture that the PS2 action RPG subgenre rarely matched. The late-game dungeon design is where the game tests patience the most, and some optional bosses require very specific demon compositions. These are reasonable asks from a game that built a real system rather than a surface level one. Wild Arms 5 arrived in 2006 as MediaVision's attempt to revitalize a series that had been drifting from its identity since the third entry. The result was the most mechanically interesting PS2 Wild Arms, a hexagonal combat grid system that replaced the traditional turn-based formation with spatial positioning, bringing tactical RPG considerations into a system that still moves at JRPG pace. Each battle map is a 6-sided grid of hexes, with characters and enemies occupying specific nodes that determine attack range, elemental field effects, and the direction of area attacks. The condition system, which generates bonus objectives for each battle, win without using items, win in under 6 turns, eliminate all enemies. These feed experience and currency bonuses that reward engagement with a positioning system rather than pure stat advantage. The story follows Dean Stark, a kid from Frontier Town who finds a half-human android girl buried in the ruins of a giant. It's Wild Arms' classic Western Frontier plus swords and sorcery flavor, and it commits to its optimistic tone against a backdrop of political conflict over what the world should become after the recent discovery that humanity's history was more complicated than previously understood. The ensemble of 5 playable characters each bring distinct hex grid roles, not just stat differentiation, but genuinely different hex movement patterns and attack geometries that make swapping party composition for different combat scenarios a real tactical consideration. By late PS2 standards, the game ran cleanly, which reflected the devs' experience with the hardware. The hex system is the reason to play Wild Arms 5 first in any revisit of the series. Grim Grimoire is Vanillaware's first release game and arguably the strangest thing they ever made, which is saying something for a studio that later made 13 Sentinels. It's a 2D side-scrolling real-time strategy game, the only one that has ever worked on a console with a standard controller, and the only one Vanillaware ever made. Lilette Bland, a trainee at the Silver Star Tower, arrives to find the academy destroyed 5 days into her studies and wakes up reliving the first day again. The Groundhog Day structure means she enters each loop with accumulated knowledge from the previous one, and the story reconstructs what happened and why across those iterations. The RTS mechanics run on a vertical 2D battlefield across the multi-floor tower. Runes function as bases that produce familiars, units from 4 magic schools that have different combat roles and terrain affinities. Each school has advantages and counters, and the mission designs are varied enough that the best composition changes between fights. Resource flows from mana crystals harvested by worker units, with the bottleneck economics that define the genre intact, but accelerated by the 2D space's tight corridors. The limitations are visible. The stage variety is narrower than the combat system deserves, and the controller interface requires adjustment time that a mouse never would. The game ran cleanly on PS2 hardware. The 2D engine was not particularly demanding, and a remaster, Grim Grimoire Once More, released in 2023 on modern platforms with an expanded skill tree if the original is difficult to source. Soul Nomad is Nippon Ichi's final PS2 strategy RPG, and their darkest by a significant margin. Most of what the company made before it leaned on comedy and absurdity as a tonal anchor. This one does have humor, but it's placed precisely around story beats that are genuinely grim. The protagonist, Revia, is a silent character whose body is shared with Gig, the former god of death, who spends the entire game trying to convince you to just let him take over and destroy everything. The dynamic between the two is the game's best relationship, and Gig is one of the best written antagonist allies in the genre. Obnoxious, violent, and occasionally honest in ways that land harder because of how he usually behaves. The room system replaces Disgaia's individual unit positioning with squad management. Revia commands rooms of up to 9 units arranged in a 3x3 grid, with each room's layout and decorative bonuses affecting the squad's combat output. Building effective rooms requires understanding which unit types complement each other and which decorations compound most effectively. It's a quieter kind of optimization than Disgaia's item world, but satisfying in its own way. The domination ability lets you absorb enemy units mid-campaign, which keeps the roster expanding without requiring grinding. No unit arrives underleveled. The game also contains one of the wildest optional routes in the genre. A fully separate storyline unlocked after completing the main campaign that takes the premise to places the main story carefully avoids. It's deliberately designed to be played after you know the world and the characters. What it does with that knowledge is worth experiencing blind. Shining Force Exa is the game on this list that requires the most honest framing. Developed by Neverland and published by Sega in 2007, it's a Diablo-style action RPG rather than the tactical strategy game the Shining Force name previously described, a fact that surprised players at the time and still generates mixed expectations. The combat is real-time hack-and-slash across field environments, playing similarly to Record of Lodos War on Dreamcast, which Neverland had also developed. Frame rate issues were documented during fights with high enemy density, making Exa the game on this list that most tested the ran smoothly premise. What the game does have is the Geo Fortress, a customizable castle that serves as your base of operations, which companion characters defend while you're out in the field. Upgrades to the fortress unlock new functions, new defensive capabilities, and eventually cannon support you can call in during field encounters. The two protagonist system, where you can switch between Toma and Cyril and their separate skill trees, gives replaying missions with the other character a genuinely different combat feel. The power arts progression, where arts are learned and leveled through use and upgraded with Mithril, creates a natural mastery loop across the campaign. The story is straightforward and leans on familiar genre archetypes. Exa earns its place here specifically for the Geo Fortress concept, which nobody has quite replicated since, and for being a relatively uncommon late-era action RPG on PS2 that has largely been forgotten outside series fans.
Next.
Growlancer Heritage of War is the fifth mainline entry in CareerSoft's long-running tactical RPG series, and the one most people outside Japan encountered first, since it was the only game in the franchise to reach PAL territories. The structure is a role system narrative told across 5 chapters, the first 4 following supporting characters from different factions in the 2 decades leading up to the main conflict, the 5th being the protagonist story that pulls all of those threads together. Playing the prologue chapters gives the finale's ensemble cast a depth that it wouldn't have if you'd met them all simultaneously as strangers. Combat runs in real time across open environments. No tile grid, no turn queue, just characters moving freely and attacking when their action timer cycle. This is rarer in the tactical RPG space than the genre's dominant format suggests, and it produces a different kind of tactical reading. How you position before the action starts matters, and repositioning during a fight has immediate consequences. The ability plate system, where characters develop through plates earned and equipped across their progression, gives each unit a distinct role without locking them into rigid class restrictions. The biggest shortcoming of the game is its rough edges. The 3D character models are a downgrade from the beautiful illustrated character portraits by Satoshi Yoshihara that accompany the dialogue. Some mission objectives change mid-battle without clear signaling. The PS2 hardware ran this without significant slowdown given the relatively modest 3D demands, which is a genuine achievement at this point in the console's life cycle. But the game itself is a flawed one that rewards the players willing to engage with its specific ambitions over its surface-level polish.
I don't see.
Manakimia is the point at which Gus Atelier series stopped being a quiet niche product and became something genuinely special. Set at an alchemy academy on a floating island, it follows Vane, a student who arrived with no alchemical talent and an unusual past, through a school year structured by deadlines, relationships, and an increasingly strange set of revelations about what he actually is. The school setting gives the game a rhythm that the Atelier formula suits perfectly. Assignments arrive, you gather materials, synthesize items, complete tasks before the deadline, and the year advances. The stakes escalate considerably as the game progresses, and by the final act the tone has shifted significantly from the breezy opening hours. The alchemy synthesis system, where items are created by moving ingredient tiles across a grid and matching colors to unlock quality bonuses, is the most tactile crafting mechanic the series produced on PS2. Materials gathered from exploration and battle directly feed the synthesis graph. Nothing is abstract. The equipment you fight with is the same equipment you crafted, which creates a direct connection between preparation and performance that most RPGs leave implicit. Combat runs a 7-character roster down to 3 active fighters with 4 in reserve, and the support system lets reserve characters sub in for specific defensive or offensive contributions without consuming a full turn. It's a fast system with genuine depth in the later fights. The game is available on PSP as Manakimia, Student Alliance, though the PS2 version has the better sound presentation by a clear margin. Artanelico 2 is a game that rewards patience with its systems in ways that aren't immediately apparent. Set in a world where a cast of part human, part technological beings power magic through songs, it follows a knight investigating a plague and gradually uncovering what the world's infrastructure actually is and what it costs to maintain. The Metaphal setting, a continent suspended above a poisonous atmosphere on the shell of a giant functional machine, gives the world a layered strangeness that unfolds progressively rather than in exposition dumps. The Cosmosphere system, where you dive into a partner's inner mental world and navigate its architecture across 9 distinct levels, is both the game's deepest mechanic and its most demanding. Each level is essentially a compact visual novel chapter set inside a character's subconscious, and a relationship work done there translates directly to combat. Songs gain new components, defense thresholds increase, and the dual stall system that powers the combat's most important attacks becomes significantly more capable. The turn-based combat itself, runs a front-back formation where your human fighters protect the singing Raventail while building song magic charges across turns. The PS2 version shipped with a translation that contained well-documented errors, some significant enough to misrepresent story events. A fan patch corrects most of these, and the game is considerably more comprehensible with it. Even accounting for that friction, our Tenelico 2 is one of the most mechanically singular RPGs in the late PS2 library.
All right, I won't lose!
This is the end!
Atelier Iris 3 takes the Iris subseries in a noticeably different direction from its predecessors. Where the first two Iris games built their world around specific towns and the alchemy network surrounding them, Grand Phantasm organizes its structure around an exploration guild, a framework that lets Edge Van Height and his partner Iris take contracts to explore sealed dimensional territories called Alter Worlds, each with their own visual identity, enemy ecology, and resource profile. The Alter World structure is the game's best idea. Instead of progressing through a linear map, you're selecting which sealed world to enter, completing its objectives, and unlocking new ones as your understanding of the overall situation grows. Synthesis works through the field mana system, gathering elemental spirits from specific environments and building item recipes around their properties. The synthesis grid for Manachemia hadn't been developed yet, so the Iris 3 system is simpler, but it ties ingredient sourcing more directly to exploration than most alchemy systems do. Edge's weapon skills grow through use rather than leveling, which means combat investment shapes capability in a tactile way. Using the fire sword builds fire proficiency, which unlocks new attacks. The combat runs faster than previous Atelier titles, with active charge gauge turns that push the pacing closer to action than the series' traditional approach. The Alterworld system's freedom means the difficulty varies depending on which territories you tackle in which order, and the game never fully signals optimal sequencing. That's a design choice that worked for players who enjoy mapping their own path and frustrates those who prefer clearer direction. Baroque was originally a 1998 Sega Saturn game. The PS2 version released in Japan in 2007 and the West in 2008, and it is the most structurally unusual game on this list. You are an amnesiac descending a procedurally generated dungeon called the Neuro Tower in a post-apocalyptic world where survivors have been physically transformed by their own guilt. Every time you die, and you will die frequently, you are returned to the surface, stripped of everything you carried and everything you leveled. The story does not reset with you. NPCs remember your previous descents. New floors open. New conversations become available. The narrative advances specifically through failure, and understanding what happened to this world requires multiple runs that accumulate meaning across each other. Items are identified by use rather than by inspection. Using an unknown item in the tower tells you what it does, which could be a healing potion or a curse. Equipment can be thrown at enemies as weapons regardless of its type. The item economy has a genuinely hostile logic to it that rewards intuition about what risks are acceptable in a given run. The oppressive atmosphere, gray corrupted environments, enemies that were once human, sound design that prioritizes dread over clarity, is built with total consistency across every system. The PS2 version replaced the original first-person perspective with a third-person camera and updated the art direction toward a more conventional anime aesthetic. Both changes softened the original's more abrasive qualities. Welcome adjustment or dilution, depending on your tolerance for difficulty without comfort. The original Saturn version is available via fan translation for those who want the harder experience. The PS2 version is the more playable entry point, and it earns its cult status.